The StrikerDC, the latest controller from Retro Fighters for the Sega Dreamcast. I was first introduced to Retro Fighters' line of controllers with their Brawler 64. It was a modern take on the N64 controller, and honestly, I love it. Well, I loved the second revision at least. While it didn't affect gameplay, the first version of the Brawler 64 had an issue where if the control stick was being used alongside the left shoulder button, they would rub up against each other and it could be a little distracting to say the least. That issue was later fixed with future revisions, as well as having a much longer cord, making it for me an excellent substitute to the original N64 controller. But just recently, my StrikerDC arrived in the mail from Castlemania Games. I was happy with my Brawler 64, so will this end up being a suitable replacement to the original Dreamcast controller? Let's go ahead and see what it has to offer. I never had the chance to own a Sega Dreamcast as a kid, although I did get the chance to play it for a decent amount, at least long enough to beat Sonic Adventure anyway. I eventually got one of my own a few months after high school. One of the things I first noticed was that the controller was not so good. This may have been that I inherited some pretty abused controllers, but the analog stick was usually the first thing to go on them. The D-pad also made fighting games a bit annoying to play, as I never felt my inputs were going in reliably. The shape of the Dreamcast controller is also a bit awkward. Not really bad by any means, but in hindsight the shape and mold could have been a bit better. The cable also came out from the bottom instead of the top, and that was kind of an odd design choice. You could attach the cable to the back of the controller, but that reduced an already short cable further. By this point in my life, I had also grown used to the feel of the GameCube and Xbox style of controllers, which become more the standard controller type for me, especially for 3D adventure games, first-person shooters, and racing games. That said, I still prefer the more traditional design of the Super Nintendo and PlayStation controllers for 2D side-scrollers and fighting games. But for all intents and purposes, the Dreamcast controller was functional, with a lot of new and interesting things we had not yet seen in a controller at the time. Before the StrikerDC had arrived on the scene, I had already started using some converters to use PS2, PS3, and PS4 controllers with my Dreamcast. They worked as advertised, even allowing me to use PS4 arcade sticks for my fighting games over on the Dreamcast. Despite having access to these controllers, I felt it was too far of a departure from the original controller to feel authentic, but hopefully the StrikerDC will fix that issue. The StrikerDC comes in a nicely designed, sturdy box. There's not much going on around the box, but the back does give us some basic information about the controller. It reads, "Introducing the next revolution from Retro Fighters, the Dreamcast StrikerDC controller. The StrikerDC gamepad showcases next-generation features and designs. This new take on the Dreamcast controller introduces an ergonomic and modern shape with added features. The StrikerDC is the ultimate way to relive your favorite classic games." Its listed features are as follows: ergonomic and modern design Dreamcast controller, compatible with both VMUs and vibration packs, high quality and responsive D-pad, extra long 10-foot cord, added turbo function to help get you to the next level, and a comfortable and responsive analog stick. So now that we see what it claims to do, let's go ahead and see how it feels in the hands and put its features to the test. Alright, let's go ahead and open this up. There weren't any stickers holding the box shut, so we'll just have to lift it up. Once we open the packaging for the StrikerDC, we'll see a couple of things before we get to the controller. After removing a transparent paper, we'll find an instruction manual, some stickers, an FAQ, and a little Retro Fighters keychain. Beneath all of this is the StrikerDC itself, so let's go ahead and get it out of the box. Already it feels really nice in the hands, and my wrists don't feel slightly out of position like they would with the original Dreamcast controller. The face buttons feel responsive to the touch as well. The analog stick is concave rather than convex like the original Dreamcast controller. The trigger buttons have some resistance, similar to what you would feel from the GameCube's controller triggers. They don't really have the bounce that the original Dreamcast controller had. That said, we'll have to see how it all feels once we put the controller through its paces. When I tried to insert one of my VMUs into the controller, the front slot had a lot of resistance going in. I thought it may have been an issue with my blue VMU, so I tried my green one but got the same result. The back slot is much more spacious and the VMU goes in with little effort. When trying this out with a Dreamcast controller, I had no issues inserting or removing the VMUs in either slot. I assumed this to be an issue with the small plastic guides that the front slot has on the inside. It appears to be thicker than the ones for the back slot. I was able to test out an additional blue VMU, black VMU, and a memory unit by Performance. Of these three, only the memory card by Performance went in without effort. Now that we've checked out the controller and its VMU slots, I think it's time to see how the controller holds up with actual gameplay, so let's see how it fares when I toss a few Dreamcast games at it. I was very curious about the D-pad, so up first is some fighting games. I decided to try out Capcom vs SNK 2, and I could consistently perform quarter circle forward and quarter circle back moves with no issue. But inputting a Dragon Punch motion was nearly impossible. This is in training mode, mind you, where you're not in a situation where you need the input to come out as consistently as possible. I eventually came to the conclusion that it wasn't reading my down input consistently for it to work. I assume this is because you have to travel a larger distance than normal to get a down input to be registered from the forward input. With Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, which is less forgiving with inputs, I struggled to even do quarter circle forward or back motions, so doing a Dragon Punch motion was just as impossible as in Capcom vs SNK 2. But then I decided to try using the analog stick, which is never my preference with fighting games, and would you know it, I could consistently pull off Shoryukens. This is a first for me, where the analog stick proved to be better for a fighting game than the D-pad. I went back and tried Capcom vs SNK 2 and was able to do it there as well. I decided to try out Sonic Adventure 2 next, and it was unbelievable. Controlling Sonic in high-speed situations has never felt this good for me. Normally on the downhill section of City Escape, I could barely keep Sonic stable using a Dreamcast controller, but with the StrikerDC, everything happened exactly as I would have wanted. It was so much easier to snag the rows of rings on the way down, and running in straight lines really felt solid. I next went to Radical Highway with Shadow and was still feeling amazed at how well the StrikerDC feels for this game. It may even get me to finish a playthrough of Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 on the Dreamcast someday. Next, I tried Jet Grind Radio and results were also great here. In this case, it's not that Jet Grind Radio was bad with a Dreamcast controller, but the experience was overall way more comfortable. And while I'm sure there are plenty of other games I could playtest, these are just some of the ones that I have the most experience with and felt confident in comparing gameplay with the StrikerDC to the original Dreamcast controller. I should also probably mention that the turbo functionality works very well, but it's limited to the face buttons of the controller, so it won't work with your triggers. I didn't really think to test it out since it isn't a feature I use often, if at all, and figured it was pretty self-explanatory. Overall, the StrikerDC is an amazing replacement for the Dreamcast controller. If you're in need of a new controller or the original Dreamcast controller just wasn't cutting it for you, this is definitely a controller worth looking into. It really is comfortable in your hands, and the extra length on the cable is definitely something that was needed. I do wish that the D-pad was better for fighting games, but it'll likely get the job done for all of its other purposes. If you're interested in picking one up for yourself, you can do so directly from retrofighters.com or from some other sellers such as Castlemania Games, which is where I got mine. It's currently going for $49.99 plus shipping and tax. So what do you guys think of this controller? Does it seem like something you'd pick up for your own use, or are you happy with your original Dreamcast controllers? Is there a game you know it'd be perfect for, or is there something you would have wanted me to cover in a little more detail? I'd love to know what you guys think, so let me know in the comments down below.